director of ANSA, that's Italy's leading news agency. We also have Pierluigi Puglia, who's spokesman for the British government in Italy, basically. And also Alessandra Marino, who's chief press officer for the representation of the European Commission in Italy. And of course, we also have Frank Horst, head of the press office at the German embassy in Rome. Now, I think we all know what traditional media and what, new social media and where this panel is situated in the conversational space. But just briefly, what I can tell you is that traditional media in the past has always been viewed as acting as a gatekeeper, often reinforcing, has sometimes been even touted with reinforcing the power structures that exist. And in terms of marginal powers, has been possibly criticized as well for having marginalized peripheral voices. And today it is true that with the resurgence of social media and all these new platforms, marginal powers, smaller nations as well, if we're talking about diplomacy and international relations, and also minority groups have new and fresh and powerful platforms from which to speak and to make their message be heard. But at the same time, this dynamic is increasingly complex and complicated because it's also characterized with a lot of fake news and disinformation that gets propagated through these platforms. So without further ado, I would like to ask someone who's on the front line every day in terms of media management, news management, and has to interact with the news that is out there on all these social platforms, because we journalists have to pay attention to what gets put out there. I would like to ask Stefano, how is this on a day-by-day basis? How do journalists live with this, interact with this? How do they fact check? And what is this interaction like?
Thank you, Alina. Thank you, everybody. Hello. Hello, Giorgio. It's not an easy life. It's difficult every day. It's a battle every day because we have to fight against fake news, against disinformation. And the difference between the traditional media and the new media is very simple. With the new media, millions of people can reach news in real time, can exchange ideas, opinion, Q&A. It was impossible it's impossible, and it was impossible with traditional media. There is a communication from one point to millions of people. This is the simple difference. Yesterday afternoon, I was on a train from Florence to Rome, coming back home from Florence after a couple of days in Florence for a conference about the future of Europe. The future of Europe is a very difficult topic. It's not easy to predict the future of Europe. It's not easy to predict the future of journalism. But I want to say, in the train, I was sitting in the train, and when I'm on a train, when I take a train, I always read my newspapers, real newspapers made of paper. I was the only one in the train. All the other people had their tablets, their computers, their cellular phones. I don't think they were reading news or they were doing other things with their devices, but I was the only one. And so we are losing this battle. The new media are winning. New media are the present and are the future of journalism. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. I'm quite old to remember when I was a child in my home. My father read the newspaper at 8 o'clock in the morning. And at 8 p.m. in the evening, we watched the television for the news, il telegiornale. That's all we had. Newspapers in the morning and il telegiornale in the evening. I don't want to go back to that time. It's impossible. But having said that, the transition from the traditional media to the new media It's not easy for one simple reason. Different tools, but we should have the same rules. The same rules of journalism. That is very simple. It's a very simple job. The rules, someone here has a newspaper?
Does anybody have a newspaper here physically? A physical copy of a newspaper?
You don't have it. Okay. But the rules should be the same. Which are the rules of journalism? The source. Verify the source. That's the first point. To write in the first line the most important news, the 5 W and the H. Who, why, what, when, where, and how. A simple title, understandable for everyone. But the first point is quality, quality, and quality. If you use new media, you have to look for quality journalism. Answer, you can find answer on a website, on the social media. But a lot of people think that it's very simple to find news on internet. You can open internet to find all the news you want on Facebook, on TikTok. But do you think that everybody could be a journalist? How much time do I have, Alina?
Talk as much as you want.
Okay.
No. Kidding. We will move on to everyone else.
Okay. If you want a good apple, you go to the shop and you can find green apples, yellow apples, red apples. You can choose what you want. If you have a problems with your shower, with your sink in your bathroom, you call, if you find it, a plumber. And if you want to go to the airport, you can take a taxi to go to the airport. I guess that someone is wondering what is he saying. I'm saying that you pay to buy an apple, you pay for a taxi driver, and you pay for a plumber if you can find him, and you need a mortgage to pay him. Why should you find information without paying on internet? Because this is the idea of a lot of people. Journalism is a very important job. You have to know how to do that. There are rules. You can find news on TikTok, on Facebook. Use the new media. I use new media, of course. But find the quality journalism. Don't think that you can find news everywhere in internet. It's a big mistake. I'm going to conclude. And the first news agency began to work in 1830, more or less. There were the British Reuters, the French Havas, the Italian Stefani. And sometimes they use pigeon to send news, for instance, from Paris to London, from London to Paris. Some of these pigeons died, some of them went lost, some of them arrived. If we could read the news they had, we could discover that the news were written in the same way we write the news today. The source, a good lead, 5WH. These are the rules of journalism. You can find in the new media, but be careful. You have to look for quality journalism. The last thing that I want to underline, and then I conclude my speech, Alina. There is another reason to defend quality journalism. And journalism is a pillar of democracy. If you don't have a good independent journalism, if you don't have quality journalism in a country, you can't have a real full democracy. This is a problem also in Europe. Think to Hungary, think to other countries. So remember, rules of journalism must be defended not only by journalists, but also by all the citizens. Remember that when you go to buy an apple or when you look for a plumber.
Very interesting, Stefano. And, thank you for your pearls of wisdom. And I absolutely agree. Social media platforms are extremely useful, and you can avoid being exposed to disinformation and to fake news if you refer to those sources that are, trusted sources of journalism, those news outlets that verify their sources, that have a reputation, a tradition for being trusted sources, like ANSA, like Associated Press, like The Telegraph, like, the ones we all know. And given what we just discussed, what Stefano just discussed, I'm going to ask Alessandra in terms of what the Commission does. How do you integrate your message, your press message, your PR work, your contact with the outside world through journalists? How do you integrate that into today's social media platforms beyond traditional media?
Thank you, Alina, and thank you everyone for being here. The European Commission has the responsibility in terms of transparency towards European citizens of communicating the work it is done on a daily basis, and that has an impact on every one of us on the continent, and takes this responsibility very seriously. So traditionally, the European Commission has a daily press conference, the midday briefing, held in Brussels every day of the year almost, maybe not over August or Christmas Day, but it's probably the only public service, public institution in the world who has this kind of, who offers this kind of exposure to its work. And accredited journalists in Brussels can ask our spokesperson questions on all possible items. This is our attempt to provide correct and accurate information. And we are ourselves exposed to this information on the same very daily basis, because the Eurobashing, it's a sport, so to say, that is widely practiced across the continent, meaning that we are, and our policies are scrutinized, and rightly so, from all angles, but are also been victim of misinformation and disinformation, a difference that you certainly know. So on one side, reporting in a non-accurate way without specific purpose, or having a strategy behind of confusing, polarizing, and dividing the society, which is usually practice with the intent of diminishing the credibility, the trust in that institution. And we have observed this practice in the last years since Brexit, with COVID, and we have been building up some anticorps, and we've been prepared also for the European election this year. Of course, the Commission has worked a lot in the past few years in this last mandate in particular on the online world. The Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act has been approved as much as the Media Freedom Act, that on the one side protects the profession of journalism from interference, but also protects the online environment from abuse of dominant position of powers. So it's a very complex scenario. On the one hand, we strive to provide information and engage with journalists and media in the most traditional sense, but we also try as a normative authority to regulate the new spaces that have been created and the traditional spaces in order to protect the work of journalists. Of course, we are not blind, and we are part of our time. Therefore, a few years ago, as many other public institutions, went into the social media dimension in order also to better communicate and to arrive, to have our message get through the youngest audience. So of course, we have a social media presence at central level. The president of the European Commission has one, the European Commission has one, the different commissioner have one. And we are present on different platforms. In particular, obviously, we use different, let's say, codes according to the platform. So Twitter is most used by journalists, for example, and so we tend to use it as an extension of press communique, so to say, so to give a quick answer, for example, under the form of statements. If something happens immediately, the president of the European Commission publishes a tweet with a rapid reaction. This is a very effective way, and it's usually well reported also by the press. But if we have, on the other hand, pass on other messages and engage the public and citizens and young citizens on policy topics that have an impact on their life, for example, we may use the Instagram. And we did it as a representation. We are doing this work as a representation of the Commission in Italy very much, especially in the past year during the European election. Where we informed the public, the citizens, of the opportunity of going and express their vote. So we're trying to let's say, work on the different fronts as it is needed. You cannot ignore one or the other, and do it following the rules and trying to also use the opportunity of social media as multipliers, as a tool to evolve and to arrive to part of society that Stefano pointed out earlier, do no longer use the traditional media. And so we have to adapt and do so using the code, but we are very much aware of the risks and threats that have materialized also with the use of, with the diffusion of non-professional journalism or influencers and so on. And we try to do it in a proper way. And also we use very much so involvement of third party to help us vehiculate policies and messages in the most attractive and appropriate way for the audiences that follow that kind of project. For example, as a rep in Italy, we worked very much with Will, which is an editorial project very popular in Italy, or with other projects like 2030, with the Vision, but we also worked during the election with La Repubblica. We've run projects with them to inform audiences about the importance of the topics that citizens will be asked to choose or to have a stance on by exercising their right to vote. So both ways we are maintaining our traditional stance with traditional media, but we are also adapting and trying to be closer to younger generation, using social media in a, let's say, responsible way, being aware also of the environment around it and making sure that there is a check of the quality of the messages that are put out there.
That's very interesting. And, you know, some descriptions you used for social media, like extension, like a channel through which to communicate to some, you know, parts of the community of society that doesn't look at traditional media, is very interesting, because it portrays the idea of social media being extremely, extremely valuable, of these platforms being very, very valuable in terms of channels of communication. Because I have to say, one thing that really alarmed me a couple of weeks ago was someone actually my age, not in their 20s. I was reporting on a story and, I spoke to them about this particular topic. I don't even remember what the topic was now. And they gave me some data or some facts, which really threw me. And I said, where did you read that? And they said, oh, on Twitter, as if Twitter was, a newspaper. And I said, yes, on Twitter, but where on Twitter? And they weren't able to tell me this. And, but they took those facts and made them, their own and, even shared them with me. So it's very important how you use social media, and also very important how you read at the other end social media and how you use it as a reader, as readership as well. And at this point, I'd like to ask Frank, his experience, his day-by-day experience in terms of government communication, in terms of embassy communication, using both traditional and social media, and how has that changed over the years? And, what are the good aspects and what are the negative aspects? And, what's your overall, take-home message in terms of this dynamic shift in the media environment?
Okay, I'll try to be brief. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's really great to be here and talking to colleagues in front of a very interested audience, amongst them possibly some future colleagues interested in global governance. So I think if we talk about new media, we have to talk about social media, as we already started. And social media, obviously, today is no marginal power anymore. The biggest platform, Facebook, is counting 3 billion active users monthly. YouTube, I think, comes second with 2.5 billion users. We have Instagram with 2 billion, and then TikTok with 1.5 billion users. So these are all very big platforms, and obviously they have a big impact on our societies. When I was about your age, this was about, I think, the year when Facebook was founded 20 years ago. Earlier this year, they had their 20th anniversary. And I think I was one of the early adopters. Towards the end of my studies, I signed up, and back then it was really a platform to be in touch with people that I knew in the physical world, where you would share personal information, articles that we were interested in, and we're practically having a discussion with people that you knew. Very quickly, the platform grew and it became sort of a digital marketplace, as some call it, where still real people had real interactions and discussions. Fast forward 10 years later, I find myself joining the Foreign Service. Back then I was a service officer in Tripoli in Libya. And for the first time, part of my portfolio was also press. And first thing that I realized is, oh, there's a Facebook account. So this is now diplomacy as well. Interesting. We had lots of followers, and actually Facebook back then in Libya already had turned into a main source of, or you could call it government communication. Obviously back in the day, you didn't really have a formal government, but had lots of rivaling factions in a very conflicted country that it is still today. And most of them, of course, because they didn't have any other infrastructure, they would turn to Facebook to communicate their official messages, be it releases of militias, be it of government policy or the power struggle that they were carrying out. So around the same time, I think this broader trend of this digital town place becoming more and more a media and news platform was very present. Today, of course, if you go on your news feed, you will most probably rarely find posts of friends, but for the most part, lots of posts of either paid content or media companies that use it, or all sorts of private companies that use these feeds, of course, to communicate different messages. So I think the character of these platforms over the years has changed significantly, and of course, the CEOs of these companies freely admit so. In 2016, 70s, I think there was another interesting development on these platforms, and this was with the rise of TikTok. Up until then, the algorithm that most of these platforms used were social algorithms. So the algorithm decided usually based on what your friends and family liked, the likelihood of whether this content would be interesting to you. TikTok changed this in a way. They changed the algorithm to become a more interest or general interest-based algorithm. So it was not about anymore your friends or family being sort of like the the example of how likely you would like a post, but rather it was based on your previous science of being interested in something. So it's really not about your social connection anymore, but rather about your show of preferences, your previous preferences. And I think this has then turned over to virtually all the other platforms, so that today we have big social media platforms that just calculate how likely you are to be interested in something. It obviously works because all of these platforms, they're still adding users. And I think last year, the average internet user spent 2.5 hours of his daily life on these platforms. In all of this, of course, this creates a big incentive to governments to also use social media as a means of communication. It is very convenient because we don't have to deal with critical questions of journalists, but we can talk directly to the public. But of course, it is also an issue if you don't have this layer of professional media anymore that is asking you then, that is posing follow-up questions that may ask you questions that you're not prepared for, that you didn't want to answer. If you only use social media, it is convenient, but for society as a whole, I think there are clear problematic issues. And then what we've seen in the past year is, in the past few years, that the problem of these platforms, that they are flooded with an increasing amount of opinionating content, of disinformation, and of content that is not even written anymore by real accounts, so fake accounts, has become a problem to the point where now even the big companies trying to limit this content and also discourage putting news items out. If you look at a statistic of the past years, less and less people are likely to share personal stories online. And they're also less likely to post news item or comment on news items. But all this discussion is rather moving into close private chats or other sort of like private discussions. So I think this big digital square that became more and more a news and media feed is now splintering also the public discussion into an increasing number of small private chat groups. And this, of course, makes it difficult for governments that still want to use social media as well, because we have to either be on all of the platforms. For instance, I can give an example. TikTok is a typical example. For a very long time in Germany, most of the politicians and government institutions, they were not on TikTok for obvious reasons, because there's huge debates about the company as such, about disinformation that is there, the lack of filtering of this disinformation. However, there was one party in Germany, the right-wing populist party AfD, that was very early on to jump on TikTok and had a very strong presence there. And what we're seeing now is that among young German voters, not only is the AfD very, at least in parts, especially East Germany, but especially young voters, where the AfD is very popular as well. So that now recently also, many of the German government institutions caught up with this trend, said, okay, we have to be also where the young voters are, and have been opening TikTok accounts. For us today, as the embassy, we work with traditional media and we work with social media. We are on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter, even though we're not there out of, I would say 100% conviction, but rather because it still is the platform with the most sort of like opinion makers present. We are on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, and many others. However, in all of this, for us, traditional media is still the main partner and most important interlocutor. For the very reason, first of all, I mean, they are professionals, so we want also to be questioned by critical mind and by professionals. And then, of course, also because they still have a very large audience, so we will always have this very strong connection with the press. There is another troubling aspect with social media, on which I will touch just very briefly, and that is the whole question of disinformation. We recently in Foreign Office have increasingly invested resources in building a team that discovers and tries to combat disinformation. This team earlier this year has discovered a network of 50,000 accounts on Twitter. They have just focused on German language, so it's really just the tip of the iceberg. Of 50,000 accounts that were highly coordinated, putting out disinformation messages with the aim of undermining German support for Ukraine. And more broadly, sowing distrust in the government. These accounts on some days were putting out more than 200,000 tweets. And while the year prior, so basically, there is no 100% proof, but it seems very likely that these are accounts that are somehow affiliated with the Russian government. The year prior, what our team found is that on certain public holidays in Russia, these accounts were not active. So quite likely that these were professionals that were putting out this information, then they were going home for their vacation and coming back the next working day to continue. This is not the case anymore this year. This year, what we're seeing is on every day, regardless if it's a holiday or not, these messages are put out. And one reason we think why this is because the cost of this information is increasingly coming down. We have now artificial intelligence tools, of course, that can produce vast amounts of text and messages in literally seconds. And this enables really actors that want to harm the trust in society, or debate in society, to just open the floodgates to these messages of disinformation. Why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because if the majority of posts on a platform seem to say the same thing, the impression is that this is the majority opinion of the population. So people who are not sure may not agree, but they may get the impression, well, everyone says so, it may be true. Secondly, it's a problem because it increases this trend of social media platforms becoming less and less a platform for active discussion, but rather for passive consumption. Because unfortunately, most of these algorithms, this is what we see, they give preference to emotional, very harsh messages that are somehow confrontational or provocative. And this, of course, is a problem for everyone who wants to try to bring out nuanced information, that wants to promote critical thinking, if those messages that work best are the ones that are most provocative. So there is an inbuilt bias in most of these algorithms for populist messages, which is a troubling development. What can we do about it? So I think colleagues in Berlin, what they say is there's basically three things that we try to do. Number one is we very much bet on the resilience of the societies. Governments, agencies, they can do only so much. It's much more important that we have an educated society, educated people that can think themselves critically, that ask all these questions that Stefan was mentioning before. What is the source? Where's the information? What do other people say about it? So this is what we're trying to, in Germany, to very much support civil society initiatives, not just in Germany, but around the world, to enhance this critical thinking and critical media consumption. Number two is there is, of course, also a place for regulation. We just had the Digital Services Act passed that became in force in February this year. And I think since August, now the big media companies in Europe are legally obliged to do something against disinformation, to build structures that combat disinformation, that filter out content. And so it's their responsibility. So I think this is a very important step on the EU level that we are very much supported. It's still early days. We can't expect this to change everything with a snap of a finger, but it's a very important step. Then lastly, of course, is traditional journalism. This is why, as I said before, for us, professional press are still very, very important interlocutors and ways to bring out our news. We have, For instance, in Germany, in Berlin, 3 times a week, the Federal Press Conference, that is a association practically of journalists that was founded many decades ago. And they have their own building in Berlin. And 3 times a week, all the spokespersons of all the ministries and the chancellery go there, and they will answer to any question that a journalist will have. Secondly, we also support journalism. Many countries around the world, of course, focused on fledgling democracies, be it in Africa, in Asia, many other places. We support the Deutsche Welle, which is our only sort of like federally funded news outlet. And their task really is in English language, in many other languages, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, Portuguese, to bring out information about Germany, to try to combat false narratives in some parts of the world, and get out, well, more high quality information. So I think I stopped there, but that's basically what we
it's been incredibly interesting, you know, having to interact with, you know, even the different algorithms and the way the different media, social media platforms, you know, take a message and rework it and transmit it and, you know, engage with their, the account holder. And also the demographics. I mean, it's incredibly complicated. Even the demographics, you have to, you know, be aware that, you know, certain social media platforms speak to certain, you know, sections of the population in terms of demographics. And of course, I think if we start looking at artificial intelligence, we're opening up a Pandora's box. And I think we need another 3 panels like this to talk about artificial intelligence. But as you say, 200,000 messages a day on these Twitter platforms, that's a huge amount. And, you know, perhaps, and we can talk about this later, maybe when the questions come up, perhaps that is an opportunity for traditional media in that, you know, if there is so much disinformation out there fueled by artificial intelligence, then perhaps that is the big opportunity for traditional media to emerge. But I would like to move to the UK a moment. And actually, Pierluigi, before I ask you the question, the one thing that struck me about TikTok, which you brought up, was that some people I was talking to in the City of London, hedge funds, were saying, well, we have to open TikTok accounts. And it's interesting how everyone's moving into that space and has been in the past years. But Pierluigi, what I'm going to ask you is, you know, as a foreign government, as a foreign country, operational, interacting, working in a host country, how do you engage between traditional and social media? Is there some tension between these two? You know, how do these choices get made? Is it a bit of a gymkhana or is it all smooth sailing?
I've run out of juice, probably. No. Okay. First of all, thank you very much to Giorgio Bartolomucci and his team for, ciao Giorgio, for organizing what seems to me yet another very successful edition of the Festival della Diplomazia. As British Embassy in Italy, we have worked and hopefully contributed to the success of many editions of the past, since probably the very first one. So thank you very much and well done. It's great that this initiative aims at sharing the in and out of diplomacy at large at a time when diplomacy would be, it seems to me, and is indeed most needed in the world. Anyway, to cover this intervention, I thought of tasking myself with the question that I now want to ask to these students. So do you think that traditional media have marginal powers or not? How many do think that traditional media have marginal powers? Raise your hand. A few. All the others think that they still are quite powerful, don't you? Okay, well, in fact, this is what I think. When I asked myself the question, I thought, well, maybe there are occasions when traditional media are indeed very marginal. But other occasions when they are not at all, they are super important. And I hope that this reassures both Alina and Stefano here as professional and very good, by the way, journalists. And the reason why I think that that is the case is because as many other comms professionals working in communications in a diplomacy context, and we have here Frank and Alessandra, every time we are tasked to develop a communication strategy, we need to answer a number of questions which go a little bit along the lines of the W's and the H that Stefano mentioned, which basically are: what is your strategy? What are your objectives? What are the audiences? How do you measure success? Well, in many cases, when you ask yourself these kind of questions, sitting in a diplomatic mission in any given host country, you end up answering the question saying, okay, what am I going to achieve? What shall I achieve vis-a-vis what audiences? And in many cases, the most important audiences or stakeholders of an embassy in the host countries are on traditional media. On different occasions, when you run projects, and I will give you an example in a minute, that involve specific segments of the population, your question will be answered by saying, well, probably traditional media is not the right tool to achieve those goals vis-a-vis that particular audience. And I will give you an example. If I, a few years ago, were asked to raise the awareness on a government program that was aiming at involving Italian businesses on an online platform so that they would enroll in this platform and they would find opportunities to match their business with British businesses or to run programs that would help them develop their trade in the UK or create opportunities for them investing in the UK. And I thought I need to let business people in Italy know about this. So CEOs, DG of big corporations. So I thought, what is the best place to reach these audiences, to engage these audiences? And my probably most obvious answer was to look at a very important traditional daily newspaper, which we in the embassy call the Italian equivalent of the Financial Times, Il Sole 24 Ore. Why? Because Il Sole 24 Ore is the most widely known and read daily newspaper for Italian business and financial communities. So on that occasion, I had no doubt that amongst many other outlets that I would try to engage, first one would be the Italian equivalent of the FT, Il Sole 24 Ore. And there we go. So traditional media. A few days ago, with my colleague Silvia here, we had to launch the second edition of what we call a UK-Italy Young Leaders Program. What the Young Leaders Program is a program that tries to engage with talented under 40 Italians and British people. And we want to engage them to create a network of people who are highly motivated in helping us strengthen the bilateral relationship between our two countries and coming from very different career paths. We launched the second edition in September, but the first edition saw young and under the age of 40 are very young, please. So you are not even born, I don't think. But so we had journalists, we had business people, we had artists, musicians. So the aim we had in early September was to launch the second edition of this program. So we organized the media launch event at the residence, Villa Volkonski, near San Giovanni in Rome. And we involved a few of these young leaders from the first edition, and we presented the program, the second edition, saying deadline for application is 20th of October. Then time passed by, and we were checking the inbox every day, and we didn't see so many applications. So we thought, well, let's do something. Let's focus on social media, because we believed, quite rightly, I think, that those potential young leaders wouldn't be on Corriere della Sera, on Repubblica necessarily, but would rather be on social media. So we started a campaign on social media using X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all of a sudden we started boosting our posts. So little investment, and you can still pay for using social media if you want to expand the reach of your messages. And in just a few weeks, we got over 100 applications. So this is testament to what I was trying to get across as my argument in support of as to why traditional media can be marginal, but can be super important the other way around as well, is that you need to know your audiences, and this has been mentioned before already, to be where your audiences are and to engage with your audiences where they are most active, not only present. So I hope I tried to answer the question that Giorgio asked, setting the title for this conference, and I'll be more than happy with colleagues to answer any of your questions.
You absolutely did. And it's very interesting, you know, the whole demographics and tapping into the communication channels for the demographics. And I think the UK held a poll a few years ago on the watching of online news bulletins on television, on BBC, on ITV, et cetera, and I think basically it emerged that people under 30 do not watch traditional television. They watch it online, on demand.
It is true. And as a diplomatic mission, and I think this applies to also to Frank, but also to Alessandra, amongst our key stakeholders are the Italian government. So government officials, Italian MPs, as I mentioned before, the business community, all these people do carefully read all the traditional newspapers that very few of you, as Stefano's questions revealed, actually read. But that doesn't matter, because when you work with your organization, you can be a diplomatic mission, you can sell shoes, you can do whatever you want. You will have a wide range of different stakeholders. And the most obvious thing to do is to choose your media, or your medium, if you want to use the Latin word, that best fit for your audience.
Very interesting. And I'm going to throw in another question, the first question out to our esteemed speakers here. I've noticed something over the past years, that social media may have even reduced the time frame of attention in terms of readership and audiences. And I'll give a very practical example. I covered the Costa Concordia. I don't know if you remember the cruise ship that flipped over, 37 people died, terrible tragedy. And it was a media, in journalism, we call it a media circus, when all the media goes to a place and they camp out for a month and they film and they interview and they cover the news that way. And in the Costa Concordia, it lasted for a month after the ship flipped over. When the Genoa bridge collapsed, I think there were the same number of victims, same number of dead, 37, 39. And the visuals were just as impactful, because it was a huge bridge that just collapsed basically and was there on the ground. The media coverage was 3-4 days. On top news items. And that really threw me, because I think it's due to the very, very fast pace of the internet, of social media, or is it? And I will ask Stefano, who's on the front line.
Thank you. I'm going to answer your question, of course, but first I'd like to say a different thing. And Frank said a very interesting thing to me. He said a lot of interesting things, but he said with the new technologies, with our platforms, we can speak directly to public opinion, to citizens, and that's wonderful. I'm a journalist. I have no problem about that, because the German embassy in Italy is a wonderful source, is a reliable source, of course. The British embassy in Italy is a wonderful source, reliable. The European Commission is a wonderful source, of course. But what happens when the source is not reliable, when they lie, when they write fake news, disinformation? That's the problem of the social media. If we have this kind of sources, I have no problems as a journalist. I have no problem. But the problem, not only for me as a journalist, but also for all the citizens, is when you have sources that are not reliable, they lie, they write fake news and disinformation. Can a simple citizen understand always when a news is a good news, is a quality news, or is fake news or disinformation? My opinion is sometimes a simple citizen can't do that. This is our job. This is what I was trying to say in my speech before. Well, I'm going to answer your question. There are two different kinds of journalism. The news are written in different way in the traditional media and in the new media. This is very important to underline. In the new media, you hardly can find an article of 60 or 70 lines, which is a normal article for a newspaper. To read an article of 60 or 70 lines, it takes about 4 minutes, 5 minutes. A lot of people does not have the time to read for 4, 5, or 6 minutes on the new media. Everything is quicker. Is this good? Sometimes it is. Sometimes I think it's not. Because if you want to understand an article, if you want to know all the details, you need time. You need to read a full article of 60 lines, 70 lines, and you need 4 or 5 minutes. But it doesn't happen on the new media. This is another thing to underline. And then there is another thing, then I finish. News and comments. And I was talking about the rules of journalism in my previous speech. And another rule is news and comments are two different things. You don't have to mix in the same article news and comments. You have to write an article about news, who did what, when, where, why, and how. And then you have another article that is a comment. This is one of the most important rules of traditional journalism. In the new media, and always in the social media, always, news and comments are in the same article. And for a reader, sometimes it's not easy to understand which is the original news, what is the source. That's important to know. This is why we have to look for quality journalism also in the new media and especially in the social media.
You're absolutely right, Stefano. The difference between editorialists, opinionists, that's one job, journalists and reporters is another. And in social media, sometimes it gets very hazy and it can, disinform and create a lot of confusion. But let's go for the questions. We have a question there. I will give you the.
Thank you. My name is Andrzej Chodikowski from Global Governance, and I wanted to ask, don't you think that new media, as opposed to traditional media, makes it easier for more people to get information regarding current events and makes it harder for government-run or private media companies to twist the truth? This can be seen with authoritarian countries, mainly that Russia, China, and others have banned social media, but it also can be seen in other countries such as the US, where the US is thinking about banning TikTok. And that's
Do you have a specific person you'd like to ask that question to? Or?
I think Mr. Poli, because he talked about new media.
Well, it's a good question. I have to say that there is a problem with social media, new media, regarding, as you said, countries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela, and so on. The world is dividing into two fronts: democracies on one side and autocracies on the other side. After the war in Ukraine, there is a day when things began to change very quickly, and it's the 22nd of February of 2022 when President Putin decided to the invasion of Ukraine, because it was an invasion. No doubts about that. And everything has begun to change very quickly, the geopolitical balances and so on. Now these countries use social media, new media, for their disinformation. It's not easy to fight against this disinformation. They're very good to do that. Russia, there are some newspapers, some agencies in Russia, in China, in Iran, and their work is the dissemination of disinformation. So I want to repeat what I said before. If you want to know something about what is happening in the war in Ukraine, of course you can read Russian media, Chinese media, or media from Iran. But the question is, which kind of source is it? Do you believe? Do you think they are reliable? Do you think they are independent media? Do you think they are free to write what they want? That's the question, and you know the answer better than me.
I would like to make a question I think that may be of interest for the students. Let's say that you have one call for a stagist, somebody that has to do a stage in your office. And you receive the CV and you see that they are very active. One of them is active on traditional media. The other one is active on the social media. What do you consider most reliable, interesting to be interviewed?
Good question.
Let's start. I must say, in my case, it's particularly complex because as a team leader for press and media, I have an overview on both traditional and social media accounts. So traditional media relation and social media accounts. Well, first, certainly it depends on the position to be filled. They're very complicated to answers, because to be honest, if I have to look at the investment, at the long-term investment we're doing, we are very much driven into being more present and more visible to a larger audience and to a young audience. For example, if we look at the result of the European elections, where we had a low participation from younger citizens, Of course, investing in a medium that they don't participate would not be an effective choice. And the new media require a certain language understanding of how this word works. It very much depends on, I go back a little bit on the point Pierluigi was making before. It depends on the objective you have and the audience you have. I must say that in our case, we are looking into new media more and more.
So your answer would have been a bit different 5 years ago, presumably?
Probably, yes. Certainly.
That's interesting.
Okay, but that's a very easy answer to give to your question. What I would say is I would tell the candidate who is expert in traditional media that we don't accept interns over 60. I'm joking. What I'm saying is that I wouldn't expect somebody that applies for an internship at any of other embassies or institutions at the age when you apply for internships around 22, 24, 25. We have a great intern here. Silvio is from my team and he's leaving us, unfortunately, because internship ends. And that is a problem because you have to retrain, but anyway, so I wouldn't expect anyone the age of Silvia and any of you not to be on social media at all. But in a way, I would be intrigued if somebody your age were to come and say, I'm not on social media and I only read the Financial Times, The Guardian, Le Figaro, and so on. So, but what embassies like mine expect from interns is that sort of expertise that can complement with the experience of older staff members like me, and a help to provide our comms with a fresh, take on comms. So I would probably still go for the social media addict. Frank.
So what I found interesting in the applications that we receive is, or the stagisti that come to the embassy, is that there is actually a number of people that they're either not very interested in social media or are using it only passively, which I found interesting. And naturally for us, it is an important, one of the important tools that we have. It's not a precondition to do an internship, but it's certainly very beneficial if you're interested and you already have some skills, like new media skills, working with videos and pictures, of course, is more important than only working with text. But for all of them, of course, the most important thing is still that they have the basic traditional sort of like journalism skills, that they, can write short articles that make sense, that have a clear message, that are factual correct, and that speak in a language that is appropriate to the audience. So it's really both important, but interestingly, in my experience, there's less social media expertise than I thought I would see in young interns.
Very interesting. Stefano, I think ANSA probably doesn't have interns, has praticanti, which is the journalism. I imagine that's the case. So I won't extend the question. We won't extend the question to you, correct? But how about young journalists that apply to ANSA? I mean, are they evidently in need of social media expertise today, or is it something that, the contacts they come with or their writing experience is more important?
Of course, we need it. I give you some numbers, not about ANSA, but about the most important Italian newspapers. Corriere della Sera and Repubblica, they sell about, I don't know the exact number, but something like 150,000 copy a day, something like that. more or less. And about the websites of Repubblica and Corriere della Sera, there are millions and millions of persons who read every day the websites of Corriere della Sera and Repubblica. These are the numbers. So this is the present and the future. So 10 days ago, 15 years ago, we didn't have a website in ANSA. Now there are millions of people every day that read the ANSA website and the ANSA social media, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. We need it. We are working for that, yeah.
Do we have another question? Yes, we have two actually. So whoever, perhaps, yes, here we go.
Thank you very much for what has been said so far. My name is Carlotta Frenz. I'm a global governance student. And from what, like my question is, in a worldwide framework, we have as mass media canal, either Meta canal that are US owned or TikTok, which is China owned. And my question is, I think more private, do you think there is the need to have some mass media canal that are European owned, or do you think it could be helpful for traditional journalism? So this is my question. Thank you.
Well, of course it would be it would be fantastic. On the other hand, there is the question of free media. So how you ensure independence of media. So a media that could be, for example, finance or support or massively support from a public entity could be accused of being biased. So there are many dimensions I see in this question. The Commission has supported the creation of a European public space of debate and of a European political space. There are a lot of fragmentations, although we are a union. For example, the basic one is the language that does not allow for these spaces to grow and to go mainstream, so to say. So, of course, one of the, let's say, priority that this new College of Commission will focus on will be to create more competitiveness and more prosperity for Europe, also under the form of economic players. So protecting industry and entrepreneurship from unfair competition that may come from other sources, and it's often then the market and the investment and the market condition for investment also in the field of editorial, which is in itself also business. We've seen how advertisement has shifted from traditional media to new media. So there will be certainly this interest, but it cannot be fully decided, let's say, from a regulator. The players, one side, have to be put in the condition, but also have to find the right environment for this to affirm. We cannot fully pilot it from the public policy perspective.
I think there's also a problem in terms of capital markets in Europe financing big tech, because I don't know if you remember, before Facebook, there was a very similar platform called A Small World.
Yeah.
Does that ring any bells? And I've always wondered, why did that not take off? And it's basically because it did not have the massive capital backing and financing and funding that, Silicon Valley or that is available in the States. So that's probably also something that we're kind of lacking in Europe. And
I guess the Draghi report reminded us all of the situation, making a very compelling comparison between the conditions that are offered in Europe to small enterprises or startups, and those that are offered in the US, and why those who are born in Europe then fly to the US because they find better conditions.
absolutely. So I think we have time for last two questions. Quick questions. Are we? Oh, here you go. You go.
I'm Pietro Bagnasco. I wanted to ask you, I saw recently that more and more journalists are leaving traditional media. I saw like last week a famous journalist from the Washington Post that left and posted on Twitter a post that said, I'm leaving because I don't believe anymore in traditional media. I think there are labeled and less people recognize. Yeah, in traditional media. And she said, I want to open my own newsletter and do things on my own, basically. This is a trend that, especially in very polarized countries like the US, but also in Italy, we can say it's increasing, where people leave the traditional media and decide to open their YouTube accounts or social media or newsletters to basically do things on their own. Then how this trend, this atomization of journalism can evolve, in your opinion, like what this can bring? Because right now, I think we see an elite of people who can keep up with all these different journalists and all these smaller realities, and the traditional media that lose quality and personnel and expertise from these basically from these experienced people that live and do things on their own. Thank you.
I guess the question is for me. The only there are two journalists. I answer, then you answer. Okay. Oh, I don't know what I don't believe in traditional media means. I try to in the traditional media, you can find a lot of quality, a lot of good, very good articles, very good analysis that you can't find for the moment in the new media, to me. So I like traditional media, and I also like the new media. It's the present, it's the future. So probably it means that with the traditional media, you can reach 200,000 people with a website or a social media. You can reach in 1 second 2 million of people. Maybe this is the reason. I guess this is the reason. But I want to repeat what I said before because it's very important. Tools are important, of course, but not so important. You can use traditional media, you can use new media, you can use television, newspaper, website, social media, TikTok. You can use the pigeons, like 2 centuries ago. We don't use pigeons anymore at ANSA, but you can use social media. It depends on what you want from social media. If you want to talk with your friends and exchange opinions, ideas, it's good, it's perfect. But if you are talking about journalism, tools are important, but the rules of journalism are more important. What I said before, you must look for quality journalism, sources, good lead of the news. This is very important. So you can use all the tools you want. The rules of journalism, the quality of the news is more important than the tools to me.
I absolutely agree with you, Stefano, and I would debate that a journalist leaving the Washington Post, opening up a newsletter is, non-traditional media, because for me, it would be as if Stefano left ANSA and set up his own newsletter. He's equivalent to traditional media in the sense that we're thinking of it at the moment, in the sense that I know He's very thorough. As an answer journalist for many years, he has to be very thorough. There's ethical guidelines, there's regulation, rules on sources. You can't just publish anything that's, that you haven't verified and checked and confirmed. I mean, for example, Bloomberg, if you write a story in Bloomberg and the source is not named, you have to get it verified, confirmed by 3 other sources on the opposite side. So if you're writing about an acquisition, you have to have it confirmed by the buy side and the sell side. So there are all these checks and balances in place to ensure, if you have gone through the traditional media system, to ensure that what you write it's not foolproof, it's not, absolutely watertight, but it's as close as you can get to being watertight. So if this Washington Post guy left and said, I'm opening up the Washington Herald Post, sorry? It was a woman, okay. If she left and said, I'm opening up the Washington Herald Post and I'm hiring 2 people, that would be considered traditional media, but because she's doing a newsletter, we're considering it new media. But the person that's writing it, the byline, la firma, is the same. So I think it's actually positive that these sort of things are happening, at least in my viewpoint. That
Sorry, just to say that there are many journalists who work for traditional media. They write on newspapers, and then they have their own websites. You can both. You can do both. You are in a transition from old to new. You can do both, but the tools are not so important. It's important to respect the rules of journalism, to give quality journalism. You don't agree with me? Okay, we can talk later. Okay.
I think we're running out of time. I think so. Oh, we have one very, very last question down there. Oh, okay. No, we have one last question there, but short, very short, because I think we have the speakers for the next session already here. Press the button up.
Okay, sorry. I wanted to ask, when talking about the spread of misinformation in the new media, do you think a possible resolution could be to create a system in which media platforms certify journalists or verified media outlets so that it is easier for the user to distinguish certified information? My problem with this method would be that the very free nature of social media and the accessibility to this status could be limited. Do you think there is a way to find an equilibrium that connects new media-free reality with the quality of information of traditional media?
Would any of you like to answer that? Does it make sense to certify someone who's writing something on social media as a sort of trusted, verified? We do, I mean, the platforms do, but I think it's not tied to whether you're writing, factual information.
So I certainly think that self-regulation has to play a role. The issue, I guess, with certifying who's a journalist and who isn't a journalist is a difficult one because it would necessitate an institution basically that then assigns these certificates. For instance, in Germany, we do not have what we have in Italy, of course, the Ordine dei Giornalisti, where you can be a member or not. In Germany, you are a journalist, whether you went to journalist school or not, and many didn't, and many are still very good journalists. So I think that's a bit of an issue. But beyond this, I think there's a very important role also in regulation and self-regulation on these platforms, not only when it comes to journalists, but also when it comes to fake content. For instance, what we advocate for is that big media companies should clearly mark AI-generated content, watermark it, or mark it in another way. So it's a short answer, not directly to only your question, but that is, I think, the role that the regulation can play.
I'd like to thank our speakers. It's been a really interesting panel. I don't know if you agree. A round of applause to them.
The list of events are ready.